Hi, I'm Herman and I give you a run through on the DMC. In the DMC we have a recording path and we have a monitoring path. So let's start with the recording path first. We have 4 inputs, stereo inputs, that we can select with these toggle buttons. Each of the selected one goes into these switches, which is left off and right off, where you use those to just compare what is in the left side, what's in the right side. Now when you switch one side off, it obviously only appears on the other one, so you can use the mono function over here, and then you can monitor this in the phantom center, and by pressing both like this together, you can flip either left or right to the phantom center, and you have a very good comparison. Maybe you can already see, well, this has a little bit less bass in there, or some other things that spring to mind when you listen to it, that give you an indication where you might work on during the mastering. The next step in the recording path are the phase reversal switches, which is left phase reverse and right phase reverse. Now, in very rare cases, you would actually use a constellation like this, where you would have one input phase flipped and work with that. You would only use this in case in the recording or mix studio there was some miswiring happen, on which usually often happens. You take a wire and then pin hot is not pin 2, it's then pin 3. So that might happen. And if you have another of these flips in your monitoring path, you don't even notice. So that's when it comes in handy, when you can flip it here and you don't have to do any kind of remixing for that. Again, another good feature on it, which is often used more, is that you can mono this, and that time you will make a left minus right. And then you can only monitor the off-center signals. So everything that is panned into the stereo panorama. That gives a good indication on how that stereo field, how broad it actually is, how it sounds, how the frequency content of the stereo, how far goes it down to the low frequencies. So all of this information can be derived from here. The next step in the recording path are the trim switches. Now the trim switches here separately for the left and the right channels. They always go together with the toggle switch next to them. And the toggle switch actually engages that switch. In the center, it's disengaged, and switch to the left. All the 12 positions here are minus, so subtracted from the input, whereas toggle to the right, all the values that you put in here are added. So the values that we have here are very, very finely tuned in quarter dB steps, from 0.25 up to 2 dB. It's all quarter dB steps. So the reason why they're so fine is that obviously, yes, we're doing mastering, so we do really need super fine tuning. And sometimes it's just the balancing stages of input and outputs that have like a quarter dB of level offset. And in order to tackle that and to have that as a fixed setting, we jump in all of these quarter dB values. Above that, above 2 dB, you see that we have a half dB step to 2.5 and another half dB step to 3 dB. Then it gets a full dB step to 4 dB and 2 dB to 6 dB plus or minus. Well, the plus thing is interesting in case you want to drive your insert hotter. So that's usually what makes sense in mastering, that you put more level into your compressors or whatever that you have in your inserts. So for the higher values, they're actually meant to drive the inserts. All the lower values are meant to fine-tune the incoming levels of the signal that should be mastered. So that brings us directly to where we're going now. We already spoke about the mono function that is in line next, but then it goes into the inserts. The insert, well, yeah, this is not just one product. This can be one compressor, it can be compressor, EQ, all sorts of combinations you can add in a series. In a later video, we will introduce the Hermes, which is sort of a controller for what you insert here, but that's a different story. And the insert, when it comes back from the inserts, the signals do have level differences again, maybe just because of the balancing stages that are used and their calibration. So therefore, the two insert returns here operate exactly in the same way as the two input trims that you saw, that we spoke about here. So you can actually really fine-tune what was coming back, or you can, when you go to the higher levels, you can subtract gain that you added in the first place to drive. Let's say we add here 6 dB on both. You can say, all right, then I need to subtract 6 dB at one point, which you would do like this. You can also notice that those trims are endless. They just rotate over the endpoints. So you can jump from 0.25 to 6 dB in one go. After the insert, the signal goes into the recording gain control. Here you can do either gain rights. Many mastering engineers really like to do that. So we engage this button. If it's not switched, this is not in the signal path, which keeps the signal path purer. But when we want to use it, we engage the button. And then you can drive, let's say you're getting to a chorus, you add like a dB here, and then you fade it back out, you get back into the verse, so you reduce the level a little bit, and you play with that. And at the end of the song, you're adding a bit of level to just make it fatter, make it bigger. And that's something that some mastering engineers rather like to do by hand. They really tape and they really print while doing that. I know that many of you might think, hey, I'm going to draw this in the workstation and I have my fades and they're perfect and I can do whatever I... Yes, you can do that. But it's not while the music happens. You're just drawing it. And there are the nuances of that while you feel it and you hear the response when you add that gain and you subtract that gain. That's something that mastering engineers really like to do. The other thing, if you don't want to use it for gain rights, then you can actually use it to fully exploit the headroom of your following AD converter in infinite resolution, so to speak, because that's a real pot. After the recording gain, that's the last part in the recording path, the signal leaves out on the recording outputs, and we have two of them. So one that goes directly to a converter, and the second one you can use for any spare use, whatever that may be. But you always have two of them. The recorded signal now needs to be monitored. And that brings us to the monitoring path in the DMC. So not only you want to probably compare your recording with somebody else's mastering. Your client says, I like this, I like that. So you may have a CD that it comes with, you may have it on vinyl or whatever. So you put these signals into the sources up here. So here are again 4 stereo sources to choose, and they're all toggle switches or radio switches. And as long as you don't press the source down here, you will always hear the recording path. But if you press that, the selected source will be heard. So a comparison can directly be done only pressing this button, no matter which source you selected. So then, in the monitoring path, obviously we're listening to speakers, and you can connect 4 different speakers to the console. 3 of them are stereo sets, and 1 is a mono speaker. Now, usually these are full range, mid-range and near fields, for example, that what you put on these 4. Again, there are radio buttons to check mono compatibility, or very small tiny speaker sets. You can use this mono D output. There is another mono output, and that is the sub output. That means you connect your subwoofer to this button. Now you can say, okay, I only use this to support one of the other, let's say the near fields. You want to support the near fields with a subwoofer. Now, instead of having to press the sub, each time you want to listen in that combination, you can actually teach the DMC to learn that, so that every time you hit C, the sub is going to be activated as well. And the way you do that is pretty simple. You just hold the two buttons and they blink fast. And now each time you press C, the sub immediately goes on as well. Whereas when you select the full range or the mid-range or the mono, the sub won't come up. It just will be activated like this. Decoupling, same thing, you just press both and hold it for 2 seconds. Now it blinks slower, and that means I'm decoupling both. Now that actually worked for each speaker. You can support your mains with the sub if you so wish, like this. That's a cool function. Another way of monitoring these days is headphone monitoring. So listening to a headphone has become, well, very, very important, because probably music is consumed more on headphones these days than it is on speakers. So we have a separate output here on the console, which we labeled Phonitor headphone output. And that sends the signal to your headphone amplifier. It's kind of cool to have it set here, because then you don't need to dim the headphone, you don't need to take the volume down on the headphone, you don't even need to reach over. You can have your headphone somewhere beside you and you activate headphone listening from here. Now, when you listen on headphones, there are two ways. Either there is somebody else who wants to listen on headphones while you're listening to speakers, then adding the headphone like this would be cool. But if you want to monitor on headphones, you just want to have the speakers being switched off naturally. So that's something that you can also program. And that's the same procedure. You just press the two together. Now you see only the Phonitor blinks, and that has a reason, because it doesn't matter which speaker you select. As long as headphone output is selected, you cannot activate the speakers. And vice versa, if you have a speaker selected and you switch over to headphones, the speakers are muted. And if you release that, the speaker will come back on. So it's pretty easy to work on speakers and headphones just with this little function, and you learn them like this. That saves a lot of push button pressing during your work. Right, the next step is obviously what can I do with the monitoring signal. And the one button that is illuminated all the time over here, that's our mute button. So it cuts the output. This is also important in cases that your DAC spits out full-scale nonsense, which sometimes happens. And that can ruin your speakers. It might even affect your hearing, because that can be really, really loud. So to have a button that cuts it all down fast is vital. We also have a dim switch. It's minus 20 dB. Well, we all know what's that being used for. Somebody gets in and you want to talk to somebody without touching the monitoring level while you use the dim button. Then we have the mono button that creates a sum left and right only in the monitoring. You can use these buttons over here also while printing, because they don't affect the recording. You can check the mono sum, but you can also check on the side signal by switching one of the phase switches on. So now you create effectively a right minus left signal. And that was similar to what we did in the input on the recording path. So these features are doubling here, once in the recording path and once in the monitoring path. Then we also have solo buttons here, so you can monitor left solo and right solo. And if you do that, you can also press mono to get those soloed signals into the phantom center. Then the signal goes into the monitoring level, which goes out to your speakers. The level you set here, it's your listening level, and you can make your marks on the scale, for example, for your 85 or 68 listening levels that you calibrated your monitoring for. You see that we have there, this is an illuminated LED, so you can see that position also when everything is dimmed down and dark. Some engineers do like to walk around in their studio, and then they can see from far distance where that thing is actually set. That gives a good indication where you are level-wise. One of the most important things in mastering is level compensation, is deciding whether my master, which is usually louder than the original mix, really does sound better. Also, in the process of applying compression, this is always a very important step to do. And instead of manually turning down the monitoring level, where you never find the correct spot and the correct level to compensate for, we decided to put in what we call loudness compensation with this button, level offset, and this potentiometer. This potentiometer has a range of plus and minus 10 dB, and you can link this feature with various steps through your production. Meaning, let's start with one of the most important things on the insert. So when you activate your insert on an input, you activate the entire processing chain. Now, there sure are compressors being involved, and you want to know if that really sounds better compared to your input at the same monitoring level. So what you do is you activate the insert and you link the insert with the level offset by pressing both buttons like this. Yeah, the fast blink tells you that they are now linked, and every time you hit the insert on, you see that the level offset goes on as well. Now, as your insert on is going to be louder, presumably, you're going to reduce that level, and you have to do this by ear, with the loudness compensation potentiometer over there. And then every time you use this and press it, that level is automatically deducted from your monitoring level. So you can listen on the identical level to compare that the best. You might say, okay, I want to compare this with a source because my incoming source has a different level and I need to compare that. Then you're gonna link, let's say we take source number 1, we're gonna link these two together. So you see, you can do this without unlinking the insert in the first place. You can just do this on top and then it changes over and links those. So every time you now hit, the source button down here, it will be linked to that input. But it won't be linked to that input. So you have the freedom to link this with any of the 4 sources. In this case, we have chosen number 1. And we have a third possibility to compare levels. And that is concerning the inputs. For that, I need to deactivate the sources first. Now, the inputs, they have a pretty cool feature. You can press any of the inputs a second time, and then you notice that it starts to flash. Now, that means that the input signal here directly goes to the speakers without being affected by any of the trims or switch functions that you've been using. When you activate it or press it again, now it's solidly on, and that means that your trims are active, all the switch functions are active, the inserts are active. And it would be cool to compare this. So that is your recording output versus your input. That is the unaltered mix from your client, basically. Now you can do the same thing here. You just press and hold the 2 buttons until they flash rapidly. And now every time you switch this from recording output to input, the input has the level compensation linked to it. And in that case, you will probably add some level because your master is louder than the input, and therefore you need to boost the input accordingly. And you can compare it like this. There is another level involved into comparing, and that's more a psychological thing than it is a technical thing. The sheer act of pressing a button is something that changes your perception in a way that you get biased on your decision. You worked on that insert with all of the equipment used for that for a long time, so you assume this is going to be better. What if it isn't? So there is that conflict between my labor, my time, and the reality, so to speak. For this, we have invented what we call auto bypass, and that is that section here in the middle. This toggle switch here has two settings. When you press it upwards, you compare the direct input, just so we've been talking about, with the output. Let's say it automates the setting between input and output. And you can hear this relay clicking. Right. And that's, you don't see anything. It's not activating anything. So you have no visual distraction on it. But you hear the two versions being flipped rather fast right now. And the more you turn the interval control upwards, the longer the period between switching. So it goes from about, I don't know, half a second to 20 seconds on that interval control. If you flip this downwards, you can do the same thing with a source compared to your recording output. The final control, the final switch on the DMC is that button over there. That's the GPI button. It doesn't have to do anything with audio in here. This is just a button or a function that you can use to, for example, switch on the red light or switch the door buzzer, or whatever you might think of that you use often in your workflow and where you wish you could have a button on your console to just do that. Now here it is. GPI, that stands for General Purpose Interface. It is just a jack on the rear panel, and it has a ground-free 24-volt signal on to switch on and off anything you like. We're getting more and more into the world of immersive audio. So we need to not only do stereo, we need to do multi-channel work, immersive audio at the same time, not at the same time, but in the same place. And in that place you have left and right speakers that you use for the stereo side. But you will also use this same left and right speakers for immersive audios, left and right. But if you switch to a controller that then does the 16 channels, for example, you need to rewire those speakers. And who wants that? I mean, we all are under time pressure when we do these kind of jobs, and we don't have the time to crawl under the desk each time we want to do immersive audio. So we thought about that, and we found a way to link the DMC with an MC16, that is our 16-channel monitor controller. We have a separate video on that. And that puts the left and right and the subwoofer, the level control of these three channels, over to the MC16. So to activate this function, you see that here in the speaker section on the DMC, we have that circled A right here. And that just an indication that there is something special going on here. Meaning that if you press the main for 2 seconds, you just notice that all the lights went off. The DMC goes to sleep, basically. And it hardwires left, right, and sub into the MC16. And you can do level control there, and left and right and sub are seamlessly integrated into the immersive audio setup. You press that button again, the control falls back to the DMC, and left and right and sub's level are controlled by the monitoring level of the DMC. You may have noticed that we're using inlays in some of the push buttons, like here and here and here. We provide a PDF at the end of the DMC webpage. Scroll down to the bottom and download the PDF there. You can then edit the text. There are examples already in there, and they are all like in frames. So when you center them in the frames, they fit exactly into these buttons. You can lift the button, the lid of the button, with a screwdriver, open it, insert the label, put it back in. Done. Well, that's the DMC. See you behind the desk. Bye-bye.